Hey guys, today we're going to talk about global issues after World War II. We're kind of going to jump around to areas of the world and see what's going on after World War II in those areas. So at first we're going to start with Japan. Now obviously Japan was devastated by the war, and after the war they're occupied by the United States. But the United States, instead of just crushing Japan, uses this opportunity to rebuild their industry, and as a result of that, the Japanese economic model is based on American capitalism, and so their economy becomes very tied to ours and very similar to ours. And Japan is going to be able to skyrocket economic growth, become very successful. The Japanese also end imperial rule. That was part of the agreement of World War II, and they become a democracy. In Southeast Asia, other smaller countries are going to take on the model of Japan, of that economic growth so quickly, and they're known as the Little Tigers. Okay, now we're going to move to Latin America. Now we know from the Cold War video that countries in Latin America after World War II and during the Cold War were kind of forced to align with either the United States or the Soviet Union. Remember banana republics? However, we do see some good things going on in Latin America. For example, the United States gives up all control of the Panama Canal and gives it back to the Panamanians, or the people that live in Panama. We see women at this time gaining more rights, and actually some of the first women presidents in the world are going to come out of Latin America. We see a lot of migration in Latin America, people moving around for better jobs, more opportunities, safer conditions. Okay, now we're going to move to Africa. After World War II and after decolonization, African populations are going to skyrocket. We see a population boom. A lot of this is due to improvements in hygiene and medical conditions. However, we do see a lot of war and famine still going on in Africa. And there's, political problems and regimes coming in and out depending on where you live because of decolonization and from the influence of imperialism. There is a resistance to modern birth control in Africa, and that's a cultural thing. And so as a result, we see the AIDS crisis arise in Africa because of, lack of access or lack of wanting to use protection. We also see conditions like malaria and Ebola arising in Africa. So even though they do have better medical and hygiene than, during imperialism, Africa still has a good way to go. And it depends on where you are. And today a lot of parts of Africa are doing very well. You kind of have to look at individual countries to see what's going on in Africa, if they're doing well, if they're successful, or if they're still having issues. And again, a lot of that has to do with imperialism and also neocolonialism, which we're going to talk about in a minute. In Africa, especially in large African cities, we do see the rise of the slums. And I'll link a video, or I'll put a video on the playlist of a UN documentary about slum life that's very educational. And slums are when you have really crowded conditions, horrible hygiene, and just lots of people together. Because remember, we have this big population, people are moving to cities to get better jobs, but there aren't enough jobs available, and so we have a bunch of people crammed in tight spaces in horrible living conditions. We do see women in Africa rising to positions of power, but they still have a very strong patriarchal society. We also see women having a hard time taking care of their children because of lack of access to medical resources. Okay, let's talk about neocolonialism in Africa. So we have decolonization. We have the European powers leave Africa, but they don't necessarily cut economic ties. And so neocolonialism is when these powerful European countries, or companies, large companies in these European countries, or even in American countries, China, Japan, control the resources and the means of production and the economy of these African countries. And so they're not able to grow and be successful because we still have these large powers controlling their means of production and their resources. Let me give you a metaphor for neocolonialism. Let's say that you were not allowed to be on the basketball team, no matter how much you tried out, no matter how much you wanted. Well, one day you're allowed on the team, but you're only allowed to sit on the bench. That's kind of neocolonialism. The African nations were under the thumb of the European nations and couldn't grow any. And even after those European nations leave, they're still under their thumb, so they're constantly on the bench. We do see resistance to neocolonialism in Egypt with the rise of Nasser, who was a general and took power through a military coup, is able to push out the British from Egypt. We also see in Iran, very conservative religious officials taking power and ridding Iran of Western influences. Okay, so again, I kind of jumped around areas of the world after World War II. Be sure to read your book to get the details and be able to connect how these areas are related. I'll see you next time.